Due to postmodernism, people don't understand heroism or the concept. Without a grand narrative, society loses a reason to be decent as a collective. Heroism has been limited to an idea that merely exists for one's individual redemption. People choose themselves over others and have lost perspective, even while saying they want to be like those they read about in the comics or fairy tales. It is no exaggeration to say that without heroism, human existence would be nothing but mud huts and tribal warfare. We are materialists here and know that the world is not shaped by mere ideas. But when in order to best get back to the all-important material realm, we must first placate and understand the dangerous human heart. And few shonen series are better for grappling with a symbolic conflict within one's heart as Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. This analysis will look at all the main Jojos up to part 5 in depth while making some predictions on the arcs of the next ones, all based on Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. I'm an anime only, so don't worry about any cheating, as I figure this is a great way to test my theory to see if it holds any actual weight. Manga readers feel free to laugh or be impressed in the comments. Jonathan Joestar, Trust vs Mistrust. We start with the origin, Jonathan. He represents the first psychosocial crisis that typically happens between birth and 18 months of age. I am of course talking about the conflict between trust and mistrust. Just as how Jonathan directly affects the next 5 Joestars, the overcoming the trust vs mistrust crisis will determine an individual's reaction to the next set of crises. Before diving into the character specifically, however, I'll explain why I think Erikson's works in the Jojos lines up so well. Joy in story comes from the heroes winning because of the reasons they're good, and the villains losing because of the reasons they're bad, to quote Storybrain. Tragedy, by contrast, is the hero losing in spite of the qualities that make them good, and horror is the villains winning despite the qualities that make them bad. All story is moral. Making something less abstract makes it easier to focus on. It's why even good horror movies, the monster is a metaphor for something. The same logic applies to heroes and villains. In relation to Erikson's works, the heroes represent good development and the villain bad development. The chaotic force commonly called humanity presents itself an ultimatum: adapt to the group or die. This phenomenon doesn't define the hero, but rather their growth. Jonathan Joestar is the good boy, the hero. He doesn't even think outside of his moral code. He's the most important Joestar because he is the foundation for all the rest. For proper psychological development, being able to trust others is the most important thing. Without this foundation, one will never be able to advance beyond their own individual power, and as such are limited in conscience and capability. When Dio gives into blind mistrust and abandons humanity, he rejects the possibility for heroism, the basis of which lies in the inherent goodness of all man, at least according to the author. As Medi Not the Bad Guy stated in his video on the man who saved Josuke, Araki wanted to use someone with this sort of appearance to show the beauty and kindness of all humanity. Or to quote Araki directly from volume 12 of the manga, Jojos is an ode to life and a celebration of humanity. In long-running series, the first book is the most important, and similarly, the first crisis one faces is the most important. It is a test of your resolve. Can you trust people and hold them close to you even as they try to kill you? If so, you have the strength to not just survive, but thrive in this world. You can't think of goodness in Jojo without thinking of the original plucky knight himself. Likewise, Jonathan's trusting nature acts as a foil to Dio, and how dark and evil he is. He will never be equal to Jonathan because you can steal a body but you can't steal the heart. Even though distrusting Dio is the right call from an objective standpoint, the fact that he was still treated like family showcases Jonathan's strength. Part 1 is lesser because it is simplistic any more than an infant is lesser because they can't do much yet. It is about potential and taking proper care, trusting that they will grow into something more. Thus, the cycle continues. Joseph Joestar, Autonomy vs Shame and Doubt. Joseph's whole character is one big search for autonomy, to the point of avoiding responsibility at times. This is why I wasn't the least bit surprised when it was revealed he cheated on his wife and left his baby mama to fend for herself. Indeed, Joseph is inarguably the heroism of the trickster. This is the terrible twos, and it shows. It is a common sentiment when addressing human nature that one must become a brat before they can become a proper man or woman. It is believed that one must assert themselves before they can properly dedicate themselves to serve others. Those who are driven by shame and doubt can become very dangerous. Needless to say, Cars is Jordan Peterson's worst nightmare. Thankfully, because we know what a hero Jonathan was, even though he was a moral simpleton, our admiration for Joseph's wit, natural charisma, and moral greatness is enhanced, such as the law of contradiction. Where Jonathan was a power through strength and discipline type, Joseph was a clever guy, and together they make the total package. So often is Joseph shamed and overshadowed by the cooler and the better, but he only ever really has doubt when it comes to Caesar. When Caesar becomes a part of him, figuratively speaking, now he's ready to take on even the ultimate life form. It's also not a coincidence that his mother plays such an active role, more than in any other JoJo part, to my knowledge. After all, who can shame you more than your own mother? Who do you need to gain autonomy from more than your mother? Joseph is the king of subverting expectations for this very reason. All this said, he is far from the dark, grey Jojo tag we will get later. He is still undeniably a man with a heart of gold, ultimately. Jotaro Kugo, Initiative vs. Guilt. Here the roles are actually reversed, between the hero and the villain in terms of necessary development. Because Jotaro is an anti-hero, he has to learn to take initiative and overcome his guilt. And he does this by defeating guiltless villains and saving his mother, who he often talks coldly to, even though he loves her deeply. We knew because of his lineage as a Joestar, no matter what, he'll make the right call. Part 3 is about learning to trust your pure-hearted instincts and act. We see this with all the side characters as well. That said, he's the most boring Jojo, so moving on. Josuke, Industry vs. Inferiority. In contrast to Part 3, Josuke is a more traditional heroic character. However, we couldn't just go back to the simplistic knight of Part 1, so here we get someone who is more streetwise. Because he was saved and has a cop in his family, he's more open and aware of right and wrong, despite not being straight-laced to a T. At the same time, we have Kira, who doesn't struggle with an experience of inferiority himself, but rather, he views everyone else as inferior and thus disregards life, ultimately leading to his karmic downfall at the hands of an ambulance, a traditionally life-saving vehicle. We also have Koichi, our point of view character, who does have a bit of an inferiority complex at the beginning, and eventually evolves into a more industrious and assertive after his adventures with Josuke and the crew. All the minor villains had to overcome their inferiority complex in order to eventually be accepted as well, whether they be a con man or a spoiled brat who collects coins. The iconic yandere of the series was a dangerous mix of industry and inferiority. Even the Stan arrows and the crazy time travel shenanigans play into this dynamic. I mean, who could forget Stan Cat? Giorno Giovanna, Identity vs. Role Confusion. Oh boy, do I even have to explain this one? Technically a child of both Dio and Jonathan. A heroic gangster, a cop who becomes corrupt and disillusioned, but becomes a better person again through a life of crime. A child whose father who died of drug warfare becomes a gangster in that very organization that distributes them, of which he tries to take down from the inside. A villain who literally tries to erase his past while being the most powerful person in Italy, and imagine being that guy's daughter. I'm gonna let you all connect the dots on this one. If you want to hear more about Part 5 though, you can check out my other video on how the Golden Wind makes it the most Marxist JoJo part yet. As for the last 3 crises of intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, I'm confident that the connections are equally as strong with the next few JoJo parts, but you can't tell me that Part 6 isn't about intimacy versus isolation. Now that about wraps up this video, so I'm gonna remind you to like, subscribe, and comment. That will all help us out, grow this channel. But my friend has one concluding statement left, and I must preface that he's not the biggest JoJo fan ever, and he's actually a heretic, and you'll see as I read this. Erikson vs. Maslow. I stated before how I'm committed to materialism above all. While I find Erikson very interesting in regards to analyzing media, especially generational media like JoJo, for which his theories line up flawlessly, I do believe his theories are too philosophically idealist to serve as effective methodology for determining or becoming a hero. But he has an important counterpart in Maslow, whose own theories on psychology are more in line with my need for materialist explanations, perhaps better explaining the meaning and origin of heroism, and relate one-to-one with a different series that's much better than JoJo. This is the part I was talking about. But you'll just have to come back next time to find out which one I'm talking about. Well, I actually know which one he was talking about, and it's Tokyo Ghoul. So if you want to hear the post about how Tokyo Ghoul is better than JoJo, I'm all ears. I'm excited to hear that too, because that sounds completely whack. But I hope to see you there.